below the poverty line, and of course the significant overrepresentation of people of color in that. These figures are actually out of date. These are several years old, which are the most recent U.S. Census figures available. And the numbers have gone up substantially in the current economic crisis. So the level of poverty in the state is actually much higher than you see here. In addition, the level of poverty is much higher than you see here. Another significant factor in the sort of underreporting of poverty in the state is that we have a very large number of undocumented people living in the state who are not counted in the various census figures and so on. And for example, one little community near my university where I've been doing some work is not officially counted as an impoverished community to qualify for certain kinds of federal grants to help the schools, because the official rate of poverty is 19% in the county, or in the community. The community has an official population of about 45 or 50,000 people. The community agency that serves the poor people serves 5,000 families a year. So if you figure a family, even just 2 kids, that's 15,000 people. Almost all of them are off the books. So a population almost as large as the official population lives there in extreme poverty. So these figures underestimate sort of the crisis, the economic crisis in California. From an educational point of view, California is ranked 43rd in the United States in per pupil expenditures and last in the United States in terms of certificated teachers relative to students. At one time, California was #1 in the United States, but in the early 1970s, there was a proposition called Proposition 13 passed by the Republican Party that limited property taxes to 1% of the assessed value. And since that time, public support for schools and health care has plummeted in California, and so California went from being not only the wealthiest state in the United States and the state with the most support for low-income people, but continuing to be the wealthiest state in the United States, but with very near the bottom of support for low-income people. The employment rate, again, the official unemployment rate is around 12%, but this is an underestimate. And in some counties, the unemployment rate, official unemployment rate is closer to 30%. The little community that I was talking about just right by our university, the official unemployment rate there is 25%. So these are figures that are comparable to the Great Depression of the 1920s. And just to give you a sense of the scale of what we're dealing with. At the same time, in the environment in California, 90% of our bodies of water, rivers, lakes, and so on, are classified as impaired, meaning that they're not suitable for one purpose or another. We have lots of toxic problems in California, and of course, not surprisingly, most of these toxic dumps are located in low-income neighborhoods and communities of color. So what this point sort of brings out is the position taken by CREC, which is that these various crises are actually interconnected in many ways. So to solve the problems, whether in employment or education or the environment, we have to address these issues from the points of their intersection. So clearly, to deal with some of the employment issues is also an educational issue. And as you can see, to deal with some of the housing issues and neighborhood issues is also an environmental issue. There are many health issues also implicated in how kids do in school. I personally find it very kind of demoralizing when the only measure is test scores and we're very concerned about raising test scores. But of course, there's no evidence whatsoever that raising test scores improves the life outcomes for low-income kids. But we do know that improving their health care, improving the educational and economic opportunities for their families does actually improve their test scores, and yet the Republican Party in the United States refuses to address the known causes of low performance in schools, which are mostly related to health, nutrition, things like that. So when you have kids coming to school hungry, when you have kids coming to school with rotting teeth and other kinds of medical problems and nothing being done to address them, it's kind of absurd to be expecting them to increase their test scores and absurd to be punishing and penalizing teachers because that isn't happening. So the position of CREC was that to respond to the real crises in the state, we needed to be thinking outside of the silos of the economics or housing or health or education or the environment, which correspond to ways in which the university is organized in these different departments. And researchers in education focus on what happens in schools and not what happens in the communities, or they don't pay attention to the environmental hazards, things like that. The people who do research on the economy aren't paying attention to the availability of adult education. Adult education, in fact, is one of the things that has been almost entirely wiped out in the state of California because of the budget cuts. So we argued to the university that we needed to rethink how the university was organized, because the crises facing the state are interconnected, but the university is not organized to conduct research in ways that can actually respond to the crises. In addition, the university is disconnected from the policy arena. The university researchers do all kinds of research that is relevant to policy, but the policy community, the politicians, don't read that research. And so the university at different times has set up little special units to provide white papers or things for the staffs of legislatures, but the university has been committed to being disengaged, right, to being disinterested, because it was seen that policy work was something very different than research work, right, and that research, to be credible, shouldn't have any kind of special interest. So the university ends up being not really looked to by the legislators or people in the executive branch of government for leadership or direction. At the same time, the university is very disconnected from communities themselves, other than as research sites. But the universities actually have very tenuous connections to the actual communities in which they reside. And the communities themselves who are looking, community leaders, community organizations that are looking for reliable information, don't know how to access the research that the university produces. So the university ends up sort of operating within a bubble that is largely disconnected from the communities and from the policy apparatus of the state. When you look at the internally within the university, faculty, researchers are not rewarded for their contribution to leading change in schools or in hospitals or other areas of healthcare, the environment. We're rewarded for our publication. And in fact, we're barely have any attention paid to our teaching or our service missions, which are also technically part of our job. But when we go up for promotion, tenure, merit, those kinds of things, what counts is our publication record and the degree to which other researchers read our publications, not the degree to which communities make use of them or the degree to which policymakers make use of our publications. So the reward system within the university actually cuts against the university being able to respond to the crises in the state. And I think this is also very